The morning sun streamed through the wide windows of the Whitmore estate, but for 12-year-old Ethan Whitmore, that light carried no warmth. His desk was buried beneath a heap of crumpled test papers, each one slashed with bold, merciless Fs. They weren't just grades. They were verdicts cutting wounds deeper than any punishment ever could. Across the room, marble walls gleamed, chandeliers shimmered like frozen fire, and the scent of expensive cologne lingered in the air. Luxury surrounded Ethan, yet he felt like an intruder in his own life, small-cornered and powerless. Then came the sound he feared most, the sharp, decisive footsteps of his father. Richard Whitmore, a man whose empire stretched across skyscrapers and contracts, filled the doorway with his shadow. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Holding Ethan's test paper like damning evidence, his voice tore through the silence. "Worthless," he muttered, his tone cold as steel. "This is worthless." Ethan's shoulders slumped, but no tears came. He was used to that tone used to the crushing weight of his father's disappointment. Behind closed doors, even the servants whispered, "Perhaps the boy isn't truly cut from his father's bloodline." That evening, as silverware clinked in the dining hall, the maids whispered to one another. "Another tutor." "Quit. Did you hear? Rich men think money can buy intelligence? That poor child looks so lost." But Ethan heard every word. He crept back to his room, clutching the torn test paper like a scarlet brand. Alone beneath trophies his father had purchased, symbols of victories that were never his own. He whispered to himself, not angry, not defiant, only weary. Maybe I really am broken. He didn't know that beyond the polished walls of that mansion, fate was preparing to send him a stranger who carried more than dusting rags and cleaning supplies. She carried the very key to unlock the silence that had bound him for years. The next morning, while the Whitmore estate bustled with the rhythm of polished shoes and silver trays, a new face slipped quietly through the service entrance. Clara Jameson, 32, carried only a pair of worn-out shoes, a faded uniform, and a weathered leather handbag that looked older than she was. To most of the staff, she appeared to be just another replacement, someone who would vanish within a month, another maid chewed up and spit out by the family's impossible demands. In the staff quarters, cooks whispered over the clatter of pots. "She's the new one." "Yeah, she won't last long. The Whitmore boy drives people out faster than spoiled milk." They chuckled softly, certain they knew how this story would end. But Clara didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that the loudest voices often knew the least. With steady hands, she unpacked her cleaning supplies, arranging them neatly as if even the smallest tasks deserved respect. By late afternoon, her steps carried her near the study. That was when she heard it, the furious scratching of pencil, the rip of paper, the muffled groan. Curiosity drew her closer. Peeking through the half-open door, she froze. Ethan sat there, shoulders tense, blonde hair falling across his forehead, writing the same line again and again until the page tore under his grip. His small fist was red from holding the pencil too tight. Clara's chest tightened. She knew that look. Wide eyes desperate to make sense of the words, frustration spilling into shame. Her childhood came rushing back. She remembered her mother tracing letters in the air, whispering, "They don't hate you, baby. They just look different to you. We'll figure them out together." For the first time since arriving, Clara hesitated. She hadn't come here to teach, but the past pulled her forward, and in that quiet study fate began to turn. Clara stepped softly into the room, rag still in hand, her footsteps light against the polished floor. She hadn't meant to speak. Maids were supposed to remain invisible, but watching Ethan battle the page like an enemy forced the words out of her before she could stop herself. "You hold that pencil like it's a sword," she said gently. her voice warm, free of blame. No wonder the paper keeps fighting back. Ethan's head jerked up, his eyes wide with suspicion. No adult had ever spoken to him like that. Tutors barked commands. His father hurled disappointment. Servants averted their eyes. Yet here was this plain-looking woman smiling softly as though she saw something beyond failure. He blinked uncertain. Clara didn't press. She simply bent down, picked up a torn page from the floor, smoothed its edges and placed it carefully back on the desk. Then she turned back to dusting, humming a tune so faint it barely filled the air. Ethan stared after her, confusion mixing with something he hadn't felt in months, curiosity. He whispered her words. No wonder the paper keeps fighting back. It sounded almost funny, almost forgiving. That night in the vast kitchen, whispers spread among the staff. Did you see her in the study? Acting like she knows better than the tutors. She'll end up like the others. Just wait. Clara heard every word, but didn't react. She hadn't come for approval. She had come with patience, the only gift life had left her. Upstairs, Ethan lay in bed replaying the moment. For the first time in months, the weight of failure lifted. He hugged his pillow, whispering, almost smiling. Maybe the paper doesn't hate me after all. He didn't know it yet, but a spark had been lit. The next evening, the Whitmore mansion glittered under chandeliers, silverware clinked, and servants whispered at the edges of the hall. Ethan lingered by the stairwell, clutching the railing, listening. Another tutor quit one maid, murmured, stacking silver. Rich men think money can buy intelligence, another replied. That poor boy looks so lost. Their voices cut sharper than the red marks on his papers. Ethan's chest tightened. He turned away before they could see him retreating into the shadows. Meanwhile, in his office, lined with towering shelves of contracts, Richard Whitmore paced like a judge delivering a sentence. His assistant scribbled as Richard muttered, I've tried tutors, specialists, foreign programs. Nothing works. My patience is gone. He slammed his hand on the desk. Maybe a boarding school will straighten him out. A place where failure isn't tolerated. The words sliced the silence, and though Richard spoke to his assistant, Ethan heard every syllable just beyond the doorway. Boarding school. The phrase echoed louder than the ticking of the grandfather clock. To Richard, it was a solution. To Ethan, it was exile, a place where children branded worthless were sent away and forgotten. His fists clenched, nails digging into his palms as if to hold himself together. That night, he sat on his bed, the room heavy with trophies that gleamed like lies, awards his father had purchased, not earned. He unfolded the crumpled test paper again, the crimson F staring back like a scar carved into his skin. Maybe I really am broken, he whispered into the dark. His voice held no anger, only exhaustion. But beyond the silence, fate was already moving. And the very next morning, the stranger who carried patience instead of judgment would step into his world, and nothing inside the Whitmore estate would ever be the same. Part 5. A spark in the dark room. Morning filtered into the Whitmore estate with its usual precision staff, moving briskly, silver polished to a shine, floors gleaming. But for Ethan, the new day began with the same dread. He hunched over his desk in the study, clutching a pencil so tightly his knuckles whitened. Line after line, the letters blurred crooked, slipping off the page. Frustration swelled into shame. He pressed harder until the paper ripped beneath his hand. From the hallway, Clara paused, rag in hand. The furious scratching and muffled groans pulled her closer. She pushed the door open just enough to see him, head bowed, shoulders trembling under the weight of invisible chains. Her chest tightened. This was her past staring straight back at her. She remembered the cracked kitchen chair of her childhood, her mother's gentle hands tracing letters in the air. They don't hate you, baby. They just look different to you. We'll figure them out together. The memory burned sharp and tender. Her mother was gone, but the lesson remained. Clara stepped forward soft as breath. Ethan suddenly looked up, guarded, bracing for another scolding. But instead, her voice slipped into the silence, warm and steady. You hold that pencil like it's a sword, she said softly. No wonder the paper keeps fighting back. Ethan blinked, confusion clouding his face. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not tutors, not his father, not even the servants. Clara asked nothing more. She picked up a fallen page, smoothed its edges, placed it gently on his desk, then returned to dusting. Her humming filled the room like a lullaby. Ethan stared, his frown shifting into something new, curiosity. He whispered her words, almost smiling. For the first time in months, the study didn't feel like a battlefield. And in that quiet moment, the first spark had torn through his darkness. That night, as the staff gathered in the kitchen, whispers buzzed louder than clanging pots. Did you see her in the study? One hissed. Acting like she knows better than the tutors, another sneered. She'll be gone next week. Just wait. Clara heard every word, but her face remained calm. She hadn't come to impress them, or even Richard Whitmore, who signed her paycheck. She had come bearing the only gift she had left, patience. Upstairs, Ethan lay staring at the ceiling, Clara's words replaying. No wonder the paper keeps fighting back. It didn't sound like blame. It sounded like understanding. For the first time in months, he drifted into sleep without failure, crushing his chest. The next evening, Clara found him again in the study. Ethan's head was buried in his arms, the lamp casting long shadows across his desk. His pencil rolled off and clattered to the floor. Clara bent, picked it up, and set it before him. Ever try listening to the words instead of fighting them? She asked softly. He frowned, puzzled, but didn't recoil when she pulled a chair beside him. Without asking, she opened his book, placed a finger beneath a line, and read aloud. Slowly, gently, letting the words breathe. Then she nodded for him to repeat. At first the letters scrambled, falling out of order. His cheeks flushed red. He shoved the book away. See, I can't. I'm broken. Clara leaned back, her voice steady as stone. You're not broken. You just see the world in a different rhythm. My mother told me the same thing. Took me years to believe her. But she was right. And for the first time, Ethan looked at her not as a maid, not as another adult ready to scold, but as someone who truly understood what it felt like to be him. Ethan stared at the book, jaw clenched in frustration. Every other adult had told him to try harder, focus more, stop being lazy. But Clara's words, a different rhythm, hung in the air like a lifeline. She didn't push. Instead, she slowly drew letters in the air, her finger gliding as if sketching invisible shapes. Don't fight them, she whispered. Let them come to you. Ethan hesitated, then copied her motion on the desk, his finger trembling as it traced each curve. Clara nodded, gently guiding him. When the letters slipped away, she didn't scold. She smiled softly, as if mistakes were simply part of the dance. Now she lowered her voice. Listen. Don't chase the words. Let them breathe. Together they began again. Sound by sound. Shape by shape. His lips quivered, cheeks flushed, but Clara didn't relent. She broke it down into the smallest pieces, just as her mother had once done for her. And then it happened. The sentence that had mocked him all afternoon finally fell quiet. Ethan's voice trembled, but each word emerged steady, complete, intact. A whole sentence. For a moment he froze. Then his mouth dropped open, eyes wide with disbelief. I did it, he whispered. Clara beamed, clapping softly as if he had unlocked a secret door. She tapped the page. See, they don't hate you. You just needed them to slow down long enough to understand you. A smile spread across Ethan's face, faint at first, then radiant. That night he carried the book upstairs like treasure. Under the covers, he whispered the sentence again. For once, the words didn't fight him. For the first time in years, hope flickered inside the Whitmore mansion. Days slipped into weeks. Each afternoon, as the mansion grew quiet, Ethan waited in the study, pencil-sharpened, books open. And every time Clara slipped in as though she belonged there, taking the chair beside him without fuss or formality. Some days brought triumph, chalk letters steady on the blackboard, words read aloud in rhythm. Other days ended with crumpled papers, fists slammed down, tears stinging his cheeks. But Clara never raised her voice, never scolded, never left. She simply laid a hand on the page and whispered, "Tomorrow we'll try again." Rumors spread like wildfire among the staff. In the pantry, whispers mingled with the scent of toasted bread. "She's teaching him now," one cook muttered. A maid, teaching a billionaire's son, another scoffed. "She'll be fired the moment Whitmore finds out. Mark my words." But despite their certainty, Ethan's eyes told another story. In the hallways, they lit up when Clara passed. His shoulders squared, his steps quicker. The boy who once avoided every gaze now carried his notebook like a shield he was learning to wield. One morning, Richard Whitmore stormed into the study with a stack of test results. His brow furrowed, jaw clenched. But as he flung open the door, he froze. Instead of torn papers and tear-stained desks, he found his son leaning over a workbook, lips moving carefully line by line with Clara at his side. Richard said nothing. He set the papers down and walked out without a word. For Ethan, silence had always meant disappointment. But this time, he didn't flinch. For the first time, he felt maybe, just maybe, he was winning. The morning of the test arrived quietly. No tutors in pressed suits, no specialists hovering with clipboards, no expensive programs stacked on the desk. Only Ethan, a sharpened pencil, and the lessons Clara had whispered in their quiet, overlooked hours. He sat straighter than usual, shoulders back, though his hands still trembled. Clara lingered in the doorway, not too close, not too far exactly where he needed her. She didn't correct him, didn't feed him answers. She only gave him a nod, the same nod her mother once gave her. A nod that meant, "You can do this." Ethan bent over the page. The first question sent his pulse racing, throat tightening. Panic clawed at him. But then Clara's voice returned. "Don't fight the words. Let them breathe." Slowly he forced himself to slow down, breaking problems into smaller pieces the way she had shown him. Minutes stretched into hours. At last he dropped the pencil. His test, once an enemy, lay before him. Ethan picked it up, palms damp, knees shaking. But instead of hiding it under his mattress as he always had, he carried it down the long hallway to his father's office. Richard Whitmore looked up from his mountain of contracts, irritation flickering at the interruption. He took the paper with disinterest, ready to dismiss it. But then his eyes caught the mark at the top, not curved, not pity, a clear, undeniable A. Richard's brow furrowed, his face frozen in disbelief. Silence stretched between father and son. Ethan braced for the sigh, for the words that would crush him again, but this time they never came. Richard Whitmore leaned back in his chair, the exam trembling in his hand. His empire had been built on contracts and control, yet here was something money had failed him at until now. He glanced up and for the first time truly saw the figure in the doorway. Clara stood quietly, rag still in her hand, head slightly bowed. To him, she had been nothing but a name on the payroll, a shadow moving through hallways unseen. But in that moment, he realized the truth. She had done what money and experts never could. Ethan followed his father's gaze, his small frame steady for once. He didn't need to speak. The truth was written in the A at the top of the page and in the light behind his eyes. Rumors spread through the mansion like lightning. In the kitchen, staff whispered in disbelief. "You hear?" The boy aced it. "No way! That maid really pulled it off. She did what all those specialists couldn't." Clara didn't celebrate. While others gossiped, she quietly returned to polishing silver, her face calm, though her heart swelled with something she hadn't felt in years' pride. Not for herself, but for Ethan, and for the memory of her mother whose lesson lived on through her hands. That evening, Richard called her into the study. Clara braced herself, half expecting rebuke for overstepping, but instead he set the paper on the desk between them. His voice was low, reluctant, but genuine. "You saved him," he said. "Name your price. From now on, you don't scrub floors. You'll be his tutor." Clara nodded once steady, but when she left the room, her eyes burned with unshed tears. Weeks blurred into months, and with each passing day, Ethan Whitmore grew steadier, stronger. The boy who once hid crumpled papers under his mattress now proudly carried them to the kitchen, pinning them to the refrigerator, even the imperfect ones. Because Clara had taught him something his father never could progress, mattered more than perfection. At school, teachers whispered in astonishment. "Is this the same boy he used to fail everything? He's brilliant. He just needed someone to help him." Ethan no longer dragged himself through hallways weighed down by shame. His handwriting grew steadier, his eyes brighter, and for the first time laughter echoed through the mansion's marble halls. It wasn't the brittle laughter of wealth or power, it was the carefree joy of a boy who had finally tasted victory. Richard noticed, too. His footsteps, once sharp with disappointment, softened as he passed his son's study. He lingered more often in doorways, watching Ethan bend over books with Clara at his side. Though he rarely spoke of it, something shifted in him, a recognition that brilliance doesn't bloom under pressure, but under patience. Clara remained steady, never boasting, never claiming credit. She still polished silver, still moved quietly through the mansion, but to Ethan she was no longer just a maid. She was his guide, his anchor, proof that even those the world overlooks carry miracles within them. One evening, as Ethan proudly read aloud an entire page without stumbling, Clara's chest tightened. It wasn't just his victory, it was her mother's voice living on through him. And for the first time in years, Clara felt she had kept a promise she hadn't known she was still holding. By the end of the year, the Whitmore estate felt like a different place. The marble floors still gleamed, chandeliers still cast their golden glow, but the air itself had changed. Once filled with sharp footsteps and silence, heavy with disappointment, now it carried the sound of Ethan's laughter drifting from the study. No longer did he hide his work in shame. He pinned his assignments to the refrigerator, even the smudged and flawed ones, because Clara had shown him every step forward mattered. To him, those papers weren't reminders of failure anymore. They were proof of a battle he was finally winning. Richard Whitmore, a man who had built an empire through sheer force, found himself learning a lesson wealth had never taught him. Watching his son blossom, he realized brilliance doesn't grow under threats or scorn. It blooms under patience. And that patience hadn't come from elite specialists or prestigious tutors, but from a maid the world had dismissed as invisible. Clara stayed by Ethan's side no longer as a servant, but as a teacher. Yet she never sought recognition. While staff whispered in awe and the mansion pulsed with new life, she quietly carried on her pride tucked deep in her heart. Because for her, this was never about titles or wages. It was about keeping alive the lesson her mother once whispered on a cracked kitchen chair. From the beginning, you were never broken. And now, watching Ethan stand taller, eyes bright with confidence, Clara knew that truth had finally taken root. So if this story moves you, remember sometimes the greatest power isn't money or status, but patience, compassion, and the refusal to give up on someone the world calls worthless. Because all it takes is one person who believes to remind you that you were whole all along.